Yasuke and Assassin's Creed. Two entities combined to unleash a fury unlike any other across the endless currents of internet data streams. The battle of the Wikipedia has thundered on with seemingly no end in sight. They have been editing that Yasuke page since all that controversy started, and to this day, as of a few days ago, they're still doing it. It's honestly kinda ridiculous. The discourse that took hold of the Assassin's Creed community and Twitter back when the game was first announced, and even to this day, till now, has been interesting to say the very least. The heart of the controversy began when Yasuke, an African-American man believed by many to have been a samurai, was announced to be a playable protagonist in Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed Shadows. The question of whether or not he was a samurai has been a tumultuous topic since before Shadows had been announced, but in Ubisoft's marketing, they presented it as a fact. Yasuke was a samurai. This kicked the hornet's nest, as it were. Lines were drawn between those who believed Yasuke to be a samurai and those who believed he was nothing more than a slave or servant to the Jesuit priests he accompanied. The loudest of the opposition being those who deemed the move to include him part of a DEI or woke agenda, which, of course, naturally got pushback from those who didn't see his inclusion as that. And of course, you can't forget the unfortunate amount of genuine racism that was mixed into all of that. I want you to meet Grums. Upon scrolling through his Twitter account, you may find that he is a rather loud opponent of all things woke and DEI. In other words, he's a grifter who panders to his side of the coin, and he's actually the reason that I am making this video to begin with. It was his lambasting of Yasuke's inclusion in this new game that initially got me looking into Yasuke specifically. Prior to my knowledge of the uproar, in fact, the day the first trailer dropped, I immediately started trying to find information about the setting. I do this with every Assassin's Creed. I went looking for information about this era in Japan's history, as well as stuff on Yasuke himself. In fact, I got this book, and we'll get back to it in due time, and its author as well. It was then that I came across all of the outrage online, and that kind of took over my initial search for information. A lot of people were saying that Yasuke was never a samurai. He was only a servant or slave to the Jesuit priest Alessandro Viglignano. I'm sorry if I botched the name. And then I found myself in a position of I just didn't know who was right or wrong. All I knew at the time was that this new game that I was looking forward to was getting a ton of hate for no good reason in my mind. In all honesty, I wanted to go looking for facts, and I wanted those facts to specifically prove Grums and people like him wrong. The research stopped being for personal enjoyment, and that became my mission. Of course, any and all biases needed to be thrown out the window, and I would have to be open to the idea that Yasuke wasn't a samurai. Off the cuff, all I wanted to do was just agree with the people who were saying he was one, and in general the people who weren't crapping on the game. That would have been the easy route, but it also would have been wrong for me. I needed to do more than just trust the word of strangers on the internet. I wanted to do more. Part of why I love Assassin's Creed so much is I have a genuine love for history. I adore history. It has always been my favorite subject, so ultimately, this became a personal challenge to find the facts, as many as I could, regardless of the outcome. So, let's begin. I'll divide this video into two parts, the first part being my journey into figuring out whether or not Yasuke was or wasn't a samurai, and then the second part being my thoughts and opinions on the controversy itself as a whole. Mind you, this whole video is more about my personal journey in finding the facts and what I did to get to my conclusion. So, here we go. My challenge to myself, as well as my goal, was to try and find as many primary sources as possible while trying not to rely too heavily on secondary sources. When researching any kind of historical topic, primary sources are the bread and butter, as it were, the kind of information you should be looking for. These are your first-hand accounts, stuff that was around when the history happened. So in this case, what I needed to find was first-hand sources about a very specific person in Japan circa 1579, which, as a 20-something-year-old college student, is really hard to do. One of my most important sources, the Chronicles of Lord Nobunaga, I almost couldn't access because, 1, there wasn't a full version of the book online with the specific pages I needed readily available that I could find, and 2, a physical copy of the book at its lowest price is $230 for a book. For a book. $230 for a book is ridiculous. It's insane to me. I'm sure there's other books that are more, but still, I can't afford that. Had I not found that source on my college's online library, I would have had to end my search there. My final conclusion would not have been what it is now. That's just a small taste of all the kinds of things I had to deal with in my search for information. Paired with that was my just general lack of knowing what I was doing. All I knew was that primary sources are the most important kind of sources you could be looking for, so I needed to get as many of those as I could possibly. The other kind of source that can be used is secondary sources, as long as you're not solely relying on them. These are your history books, articles, scholarly journals, museum curators, professors, or maybe YouTubers who provide a good amount of primary sources in their bibliographies or descriptions. You shouldn't use these as your only form of information because they have the possibility of being incorrect or wrong, but they can be helpful in a search, and better yet, they can point you in the direction of primary sources. In the case of secondary sources, I did end up with more than I would have liked to have had as opposed to the primary sources, but the ones I'm including are compelling enough that I thought it'd be worthy to include them in this video. One of them in particular was actually Wikipedia. I was flabbergasted initially as to why so many people were fighting over that website. Back when I was in middle school, we were taught to not use it as it wasn't a viable source of information, that it could be altered or say whatever somebody wanted it to say. So I was trying not to use it off the bat, but a professor at my college showed me how to use it properly, and that kind of just opened the door for me. Also, hi, thank you so much for the help again, I really appreciate it. Here I am, making the thing that I said I'd make. Yay, thank you. The references and sources section at the bottom became a lifeline for me. So, off the bat, I kind of just didn't achieve my goal with the whole finding more primary sources than secondary sources, but either way, I'm going to use them because they are rather interesting. But enough beating around the bush, let's dive into what I found, starting with the primary sources. First off, the one that could have cost me $230, Shincho Koki, the Chronicles of Lord Nobunaga. This is written by Ota Gyuchi, a retainer of Lord Nobunaga, the feudal lord who requested Yasuke's presence when he arrived in Japan. The only excerpt I could find was in Book 14 of the Chronicles, reading, quote, "On the 23rd of the second month, came from the Krishiten country. He appeared to be 26 or 27 years old, black over his whole body, just like an ox. This man looked robust and had a good demeanor. What is more, his formidable strength surpassed that of 10 men. The Batarin brought him along by way of paying his respects to Nobunaga." This translated version of the Chronicles was worked on by the Netherlands Association for Japanese Studies, and in the author's notes they go into more detail about this man. Quote, "The black slave in question traveled to Kyoto in the retinue of the inspector of the Jesuit Order's Asian missions, Padre Visitador Alexandro Villagnano, According to Froys, throngs of the curious flocked together, whether the, not reading that, might be seen across the way, and caused a riot in front of the Jesuit residence in Kyoto, breaking down the gate in the effort to catch a glimpse of him. Nobunaga, one city block away in the Honnoji, did not remain unaware of the hubbub or uninformed of its cause. When he called for the black man to be brought for a personal viewing, Padre Organtino took him. This command performance took place on the 27th of March by the Julian calendar, a date that corresponds with one given here by Gyuchi. The official audience with Nobunaga, to which Valignano was accompanied by Organtino and Froys, and at which formal presents were exchanged, occurred 2 days later. See Froys' letter of 14th of April, 1581, Cartas, version 2. I don't know how to read what that is. At some point, Valignano turned over the slave to Nobunaga upon the hegemon's express request. And then there's another reference to Cartas. This is all I could extract regarding Yasuke in the Chronicles, but it pointed me into the direction of Louise Froys, a Jesuit missionary who wrote on key events that involved Yasuke, and also authored Cartas, which translates to letters, and Historia de Japan. I was never able to access Historia de Japan in particular, and even if I could, I more than likely wouldn't be able to read it, so that was pretty much a dead end. Cartas, on the other hand, I was able to find this. And, well, I can't read that. In general, I am just not fluent in Portuguese. I believe these pages are specifically ones regarding Yasuke, so this kind of became a carrot dangled in front of me that was always in sight but out of reach. I was straight out of luck for a bit there. Until, thanks to Wikipedia, I got access to Michael Cooper's They Came to Japan. Again, not a lot about Yasuke here, but there is still something. Quote, I'm not reading that. Camera Manuel Missos, page 119. The curiosity of the Japanese on seeing colored people is not altogether a thing of the past, as I once had occasion to note in a remote country village. Vizcaino remarked that the people were much amazed at his drummer, and he speculated on the financial possibilities of putting him on show. Froys, writing on April 14, 1581, relates how the inquisitive populace of Miyako broke down the door of the Jesuit residence in their eagerness to inspect a slave, and several were injured in the ensuing brawl. So great was their desire to see him that it was alleged that he could have earned at least 10,000 cruzados in a very short time if put on exhibition. All this aroused the curiosity of Nobunaga, who summoned the man into his presence. He was so intrigued by the dusky fellow that he made him strip to the waist to satisfy himself that his color was genuine. The ruler thereupon called his children to witness this extraordinary spectacle, and one of his nephews gave the man a sum of money. Cartas, 1598, Volume 2. If I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is Cartas translated in some capacity, which is great, but it doesn't say anything in regards to Yasuke specifically being a samurai. So, from the top, he definitely existed. He was a slave or servant to the Jesuit priests, and he accompanied them to Kyoto. There was a fight that broke out because the locals wanted to see him. Nobunaga requested to see him and then tried to clean the color off of his skin. He was turned over to Nobunaga after a gift exchange, and that's it. With what primary sources I could gather, that's all to the story. The rest of the story that I can't confirm with this primary evidence is that Nobunaga gifted Yasuke a katana and then took him as a retainer, which would have made him in some capacity a samurai. In my early days of searching for information, I thought it would be a good idea to email a bunch of history professors and museums who specialized in feudal Japan and samurais. Of the very few responses I did actually get back, one of them was a professor from a very prestigious institution who asked to remain anonymous, but that doesn't really matter. I would love to show you that email I got from them, but I lost it. I accidentally deleted it, and that really sucks. But I do remember bits and pieces of what they had said, and it was really interesting. From what I can remember, they explained that in regards to the controversy itself, part of it depended on an individual's definition of what a samurai was. One definition is that if a person was in the service of a lord, otherwise known as a retainer, that would be enough to qualify them as a samurai, which would make Yasuke a samurai. The other definition was that only a mounted warrior could be classified as a samurai, which would then mean Yasuke wasn't a samurai. I really wish I could share that email with you. It was so cool to get it, and I'm kicking myself for losing it. But it did give me key pointers on what to be looking for when I was searching for information in general. Specifically, that if Nobunaga had retained Yasuke, made him a retainer, that would point more to him being a samurai. I saw people tweeting that retainers were different from samurais, but the literal definition of a retainer is a samurai. They're pretty much synonymous. Regardless of that, my primary sources never really mentioned him being retained in any capacity, at least the ones that I could access. So now let's just go ahead and look at all the secondary sources I was able to find. These backs up the primary sources I have, and also use sources that I couldn't end up accessing, but are still interesting enough and are useful in determining whether or not Yasuke was a samurai. One of the most helpful of my secondary sources was by John G. Russel, a professor at Gifu University in Japan, in what I believe is a scholarly journal written by him from 2007 titled Excluded Presence, Shoguns, Minstrels, Bodyguards, and Japan's Encounters with the Black Other. He writes, quote, "The most well-documented case is that Yasuke, a Mozambican brought to Japan by the Italian Jesuit Alessandro Velignano, who was presented to Daimyo Oda Nobunaga in 1581. The first Japanese reference to Yasuke appears in Ota Gyuchi's Shinchokoki, Chronicles of the Life of Oda Nobunaga, wherein he is described as a robust young man of about 16 or 17 years of age, black as a bull and of fine character. An account of Japanese reaction to Yasuke written in 1584 by Portuguese Jesuit Luiz Frois, who accompanied Vilignano to Kyoto, describes an incident in which the townspeople, clamoring for a glimpse of the African, broke down the doors of a Jesuit residence, the ensuing melee resulting in the death and injury of several of the participants. Upon seeing the African, Nobunaga had him stripped and bathed to determine for himself if his skin color was natural. Perhaps more extraordinary is that Yasuke's story doesn't end here. Retained as an attendant to Nobunaga, he later accompanied him into battle against the rival lord Akechi Mitsude, who upon defeating Nobunaga at Horyuji, spared the African and subsequently released him. Russell continues, Tohoku University professor Fujita Midori places the number of Africans temporarily residing in Japan during the 16th century at several hundred. Some came to Japan as slaves, servants, valets, sailors, soldiers, and interpreters. Their roles were not limited to serving Europeans. Like Yasuke, a number of Africans were employed by daimyo in various capacities, as soldiers, gunners, drummers, and entertainers. Now, as you can see, he goes further and tells the story that I can't find evidence for. There is a difference in the ages, and he goes further in saying Yasuke was Mozambican, which I don't know what the source of is. The most contentious part of this whole controversy is that Yasuke was retained by Nobunaga and joined him in battle. Russell points to two notable sources that I could find in the author's notes that could aid that idea. The one that I couldn't find that I would have really liked to was Fujita Midori's early history of Afro-Japanese relations, people called, I don't know if you can say that, in the 16th century. I have a gut feeling he may have touched on Yasuke's story and may have provided some evidence. A professor from Japan is kinda who I was looking for to begin with, and both Russell and Midori are that. I feel like their words hold some weight. The other source that Russell provides is in the author's notes. Quote, Endo Shusaku's novel, the N-word in Japanese, offers a comical retelling of Yasuke's narrative in which the titular character, renamed Tsumpa, is reduced to a cowardly infantile buffoon. Now, I can't access this novel, and even if I could, I don't think I'd be able to read it because I think it'd be in Japanese. And on some level, I don't know if I'd want to read it because of that title. But I think this is notable because why would a writer from Japan in the 1970s write about Yasuke, albeit to make fun of him, if there wasn't some level of truth to the story? Whatever Endo Shusaku wrote about in general, in that not great named book, had inspiration that could point in the direction of Yasuke being retained by Nobunaga. But I digress because I feel like I'm going in the realm of speculation, and I kind of want to avoid that as much as possible, even though I've probably already have been there. On the Wikipedia page of Yasuke, there was a source that I found particularly interesting, Source 7, which is The History of Oda Nobunaga Beyond the Shinchoki, which is a Japanese source I can't read, but whoever added it did put in what I believe is a translation. Quote, "It was ordered that the young black man be given a stipend named Yasuke and provided with a sword and a private residence. At times, he was also entrusted with carrying the master's weapons." I don't know what this book really is, but if it's a primary source of some kind or secondary source with a bunch of primary sources, then that would definitely point to Yasuke being a samurai. The sources on Yasuke's page all usually in some way source back to the Britannica article on Yasuke. And with that, it's now time to talk about the author of both the Britannica article and this book, Thomas Lockley, a professor at the Nihon University in Tokyo. Like I said, I picked up this book before I even knew there was a controversy. When I did find out about the controversy, I also found that people were saying Lockley essentially wasn't a reliable source. And I think one of my first times seeing a Grum's tweet was when he was claiming that Lockley was being put under investigation by the university. Upon digging into this claim, I didn't find much in the way of reliable sources to back up that there was an investigation. But for better or worse, because of Grum's, I did go digging into the reliability of this book as a source. Based on what I did read, it's an entertaining dramatization of Yasuke's life and of him being a samurai. It also details life in Japan at the time. But that's about it. It's less history and more a story. The bibliography is also lacking in sources directly linking to Yasuke being a samurai. In fact, the sources that I was able to find in the book are just the sources that I listed earlier in the video that kept coming up over and over again. Everything else source-wise was really just background for Japan at the time and linking to the culture and whatnot. I didn't want to read the whole thing for this video if it wasn't going to be a reliable source. Luckily for me, I did find someone who read the whole thing and left a review for it, and that review pretty much sums up perfectly my issues with this book and using Thomas Lockley as a source as a whole. A review by R.W. Purdy, a history professor at John Carroll University in Ohio, says, quote, "The challenge in this historic account of the legendary African warrior is that there is precious little primary evidence about him. Yasuke left no account of his own, and according to the authors, only 4 people could be considered witnesses to his experience in Japan. Of these, 2 Japanese and 1 Jesuit recorded no more than 1 or 2 lines. The longest is about Yasuke's initial meeting with Nobunaga in Kyoto. The 2 Japanese sources are also the only ones that give his Japanese name, Yasuke. The 4th witness is Jesuit Louis Frois, a prodigious letter writer. Most of his letters, according to the authors, are found in Cartas que os padres e eramos da Cambriana de Jesus escrevera dos reinos de Japan y China tu. Letters written by the fathers and brothers of the Society of Jesus from the Kingdom of Japan and China, Volume 2. The work was heavily edited and censored, and, the authors note, the few surviving editions of the originals were wasting away in European libraries accessible to only the most dedicated scholars." Purdy goes on to state that, quote, "The book is clearly intended as popular history, and while it may be unfair to judge a book by what it is not, the scarcity of primary sources on Yasuke is compounded by the lack of scholarly citations or other means to document the narrative. The afterword lists chapter by chapter selected readings of primary and secondary sources, but no direct citations. The omission of citations is not necessarily a question of veracity of the scholarship, but the authors frequently go into detail about Yasuke and his personal reactions, like his kidnapping from Africa and his sword fight with a young enemy samurai, with no cited documentation. That perfectly sums up my biggest problem I have with Lockley as a source. He doesn't provide much more than the sources we've already gone over. Yet his whole thing, his whole claim to fame is Yasuke's story, is this book. He wrote the book on Yasuke. It's also why I'm cautious in using the Britannica page as a source, because as far as I can tell, there are no sources you can access from here, and it is written by Lockley, who already doesn't provide a lot of sources. So, yeah, anything from Wikipedia linking back to Lockley, I'm cautious to trust. If there was more in the realm of primary sources that he provided, that would be different, but there isn't. One final secondary source that influenced this video is the YouTube video by the Birdman called Debunking the Grift, Go Woke, Go Broke. The Birdman is a YouTuber who I followed originally because of his entertaining CinemaSins videos where he sins the CinemaSins guy, which are really funny to me. But this video is in line with a new series in which he targets various grifters, grifts, or other disingenuous folks. This one caught my eye, and I think you can see why. In the segment where he addresses this very controversy, he states that Yasuke definitively was a samurai.
He was written about by Jesuit missionaries, specifically the Portuguese Luís Frois, who documented most of what we know about Nobunaga and Yasuke's relationship in the book Historia de Japam, and the Italian Alessandro Valignano, the man who literally brought Yasuke to Japan back in 1581. As for him being a samurai, he, without a doubt, was. We know he was a retainer. In 16th century feudal Japan, retainers that were in a militaristic or security role were samurai. Being that Yasuke was the bodyguard of Nobunaga as written by Luís Frois, this places him as a part of the Bushi. You may recognize this word as being the root word for Bushido, or the way of the warrior, a code of ethics followed by samurai. I could stop there, as that satisfies the requirement for someone to be considered a samurai, but Frois also wrote that Nobunaga gifted Yasuke a katana, which in that time period was highly significant as it conferred not just the right to bear arms, but also signified a form of social elevation within samurai hierarchy.
Again, I can't access Historia de Japam, so if it does say anything alluding to Nobunaga giving Yasuke a katana, then I'm more inclined to agree with his assertion. What struck me the most was his confidence in saying that Yasuke was a samurai. My only issue with any of this is the fact that his sources he provides in his descriptions, I just can't access. I've tried, but I can't. So it's just another case of secondary sources saying he was a samurai and then me not being able to access the primary source, which really sucks and has been very annoying to deal with. So with all of this in mind, we come back to the question, was Yasuke a samurai? My conclusion? If it were based solely on the primary sources, my answer is there just isn't enough to definitively say he was or wasn't one. If we are, however, looping in the secondary sources that are provided in this video with the primary sources, then I think he probably was one in some capacity. Seeing as all the secondary sources I was able to find were people who no doubt had better access to primary sources than I did, I have no good reason to doubt why they would come to the conclusions that they did, though I really wish I could have seen them for myself. For me, it's disappointing that I couldn't find or access so much. It was frustrating turning each corner and just getting blocked by a lack of availability or just knowing that I wouldn't have been able to read whatever was written anyways. Part of me thinks that there was at some point a mistake made on my end or I missed something along the way. Maybe one of you could point me in the right direction and put me on the right path, but even then, I think the main thing with me is that I won't be satisfied with what I have. I wish I could have just held Historia de Japam or Cartas in my hands, that I knew Portuguese or Japanese so I could read straight from the source. A part of me is always going to want that. I won't be fully satisfied in determining whether or not Yasuke was or wasn't a samurai until I have that. It's one thing to find something online and hear someone say something's a fact. It's another thing entirely to hold it in your hands and to look at it. To me, that's just something magical. To just hold history. There's something special about that. But that is probably never going to happen, and I have to learn to be okay with that. As for the controversy itself, I think there are a few things to note. One was that I think I made a mistake at the beginning of all of this in not realizing that it's not a bunch of Assassin's Creed fans mad about Yasuke's inclusion. What it really is a bunch of disingenuous hacks and grifters who want to peddle their stupid, idiotic culture war agenda. If you're not playing the game because of Yasuke, I don't think you were ever an Assassin's Creed fan to begin with, and I don't think you ever cared if Shadows was going to be good or not. Shadows being good doesn't hinge on whether or not Yasuke was a samurai. What it really hinges on is gameplay and story, but trying to convince people like that, like Grums, is just running into a brick wall expecting yourself to go through. That's never gonna happen. I mean, the levels of disingenuous that some of them can be is ridiculous. There's one thing in particular that has genuinely pissed me off with these people. Notice, in the entire runtime of this video, I have not once mentioned the whole other playable character that Shadows is gonna have. Now way. This whole controversy completely overshadowed her existence in this game. In fact, there are people who just straight up ignore her. The amount of "make a game in Japan doesn't let you play as a Japanese character" tweets absolutely infuriates me. I mean, hello, there's a whole other person on the box art who is Japanese who you can play as. But if you bring it up, they'll just give you some bullshit, if anything at all. I mean, Grums, again, perfect example of this. I do think that there are valid criticisms to be had here, though. I think that there are people who are genuinely not happy with the creative decisions made for this game, and as someone who doesn't like Valhalla all that much, I get that to a point. There are people who are just unhappy that they can't play as a Japanese samurai in this game, and on some level I get that too. But separate from all of that, I think that the determining factors for whether or not Shadows is a good game doesn't lie anywhere with that. It lies with whether or not the gameplay mechanics or the story is good. And the only way to form a true opinion on that is if you play the game for yourself. This game could always end up being another Valhalla for me, but there is no way for me to know that until I actually play the game for myself. And I think that any opinions on the game, the only valid ones at least, are going to be coming from people who actually play it. I think that there are definitely reasons to be upset with Ubisoft, whether it's over their mishandling of the marketing or just in general how out of touch they can be as a company as a whole with gamers. I do think that Ubisoft has dropped the ball on numerous occasions with this game prior to its release. The Torygate situation, for example, that was pretty bad. In general, Ubisoft makes awful decisions time and time again. They are the ones who say us players should get comfortable with not owning our games. They are the ones peddling stupid Ezio NFTs, wasting resources on that garbage. They are the ones making single-player experiences require an internet connection to download. They are the ones dropping the ball time and time again with screwing up their research and self-sabotaging to the point where, on some level, I think it's intentional. I didn't fully understand the importance of the shrine thing until a friend explained it to me. I pushed back against it at first because I chalked it up to just another thing that people were hating on the game for no reason. But after they explained it and looking further into it, yeah, it's as if you're defacing a grave, burning a cross, or spitting on the flag, and that's a big oversight to say the very least. At the most, severely disrespectful. The execs making those decisions rightfully deserve rebuke for that. But I don't think it's really justifiable to be mad at Ubisoft over including a character that's been in other things before. There are people who are already justifiably mad at Ubisoft for their crap, but they'll take every little thing and add that to the pile, and I don't think Yasuke should be one of those things. Overall, I will say there being so little known about Yasuke actually makes him a perfect addition for Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed always plays with history. There's the history in our history books, and then there's what the Animus can actually show its users. Yasuke's legend can fit perfectly in the series. Nobunaga retaining him and then taking him out on the battlefield, all stuff that I can't personally confirm. But there's plenty of room in the series for it. I mean, in Assassin's Creed, there was an assassin who fist-fought the Pope over a magical ancient artifact. In Assassin's Creed, two main characters can be reincarnated versions of Norse gods who are actually not Norse gods, but actually beings from a precursor race of superhuman whatevers who created humanity to be their servants. So I don't think it's far-fetched to say at all that in Assassin's Creed, a figure shrouded in mystery because there's so little actually known about him could actually have been a samurai in his time. In that universe, I don't know, modern-day Templars probably tried to erase all records of Yasuke because, I don't know, he was problematic for their evil plans. You can make up whatever for this series because there's room for that. There are a lot of people who would say that it's historically inaccurate, and don't get me wrong, I absolutely love when developers do their damnedest to make something as historically accurate as possible. But in general, Assassin's Creed has never truly been historically accurate. A lot of people will point out the crossbow and dagger thing from the first game, where the developers got rid of the crossbow and replaced it with a dagger because there weren't crossbows at that time period. But all those people pointing that out will always leave out the fact that Altair, at the end of the game, was suspended in the air, unable to move because of a magic ball. Even if you make that argument, though, there's always something else. They always push the goalpost. The people mad about Yasuke will never be satisfied. So, really, the best thing you can do is just ignore all the people who, frankly, just don't like the black guy. And here's the real kicker. I'm probably not going to play as Yasuke all that much myself. His gameplay style is not what I come to this series for. I've stated before in a previous video that Ubisoft would have to start catering between classic fans of the series and newer fans of the series. This is just them doing that. The samurai is the character for the newer fans. He's more focused on combat. He's stronger, heavier hitting. His whole deal is that he's not meant for stealth. He's not really built to do parkour, and on top of all that, he doesn't have a hidden blade. Naoe, on the other hand, is all of those things. She's the ninja, the assassin, the stealthy, good at parkour, wielding a hidden blade character that was made for a classic fan like me. I'm really excited to play as her, and it's really a shame that all of this nonsense has completely overshadowed the fact that she has the potential to be what us classic fans have been waiting for from this series in a long time. On some level, I think that the game may have benefited from them just not including a samurai to begin with, mostly because of the mechanic where you can switch between a stealth and a non-stealth playstyle, which essentially makes this game, Assassin's Creed Shadows, an obtuse version of Ghost of Tsushima, in which that game you could do the same thing, switch gameplay styles, but you weren't limited with one character. You could just switch freely because you're playing one guy who could do both stealth and non-stealth. The comparison has been made between the two games time and time again, and it doesn't help that Ghost of Yotai is supposed to come out this year, and both games are set in the same time frame, and the same era, which, it's just kind of funny. Ubisoft could have avoided all of the comparison had they just made a game focused on being a ninja experience. Having just Naoe would have made it more distinct from Ghost, since in Ghost of Tsushima, despite having stealth, that's more of a samurai game. But in all honesty, this is just the ramblings of a classic AC fan who doesn't want to have room for newer fans who would rather play as a samurai. I want to, be cool and let people enjoy their gameplay style, but there's just a bit of a gatekeeper in me, so I'm sorry about that. That's about all I can say about any of this. At the end of the day, I did what I set out to do. I made an effort to go and find as much as I could in the information realm. I didn't just rely on some random Twitter comments, and I formed my own opinion based off what facts I did find. I didn't parrot someone else I agreed with, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud of me doing that. I'm proud of myself for that. Over the course of this whole thing, making this whole video, my love for history grew. It felt like I was solving a mystery, and I know, I made mistakes along the way. I feel like I missed something. But I tried. I tried my best, and that's more than you can say for some other people. Honestly, I probably have to thank Grumps for inspiring me to do any of this. If I did get anything wrong, please let me know. Point me in the right direction. Maybe someone out there has what I was not able to find. And if they do, I'd love to see it. I'm always willing to learn more. What do you think about Shadows? Are you excited for it? Are you not excited for it? Are you going to be playing it? Are you not going to be playing it? What do you think about this whole controversy, this whole thing? Do you think Yasuke was a samurai? Do you think he wasn't? Let me know in the comments below. Let's start a discussion. I am so unbelievably happy that I finally finished this video after 10 months of research and just having crap happen to me. It's finally done, and now all I have left to do is go and pick up my copy of Assassin's Creed Shadows and play it. So cheers to that, and cheers to any of you who are going to be doing the same thing. And of course, thank you so much for watching. It means a lot that you stayed to the end, and if you liked it, leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. have a wonderful day, have a wonderful night,